Should we just skip the budget review and hand the money directly to the vendor who last gave you a branded tote bag? That's what I said, out loud, in the middle of the Q4 budget meeting. Right after the new VP suggested reallocating $400,000 from internal risk audits to external relationship development. Translation: overpriced golf trips with contract vendors who think compliance is just a font choice. There was a beat of silence, then chuckles, mostly from the junior analysts and one of the finance directors who nearly choked on his coffee. Even old man Patterson cracked a grin, and his soul left this place in 2009. But across the room, the new VP, Brandon, fresh off his executive culture immersion or whatever buzzword circus he clawed his way out of, just sat there. Eyes narrowed, jaw tight, pen stopped tapping. Ever see someone try to process humor like it's a spreadsheet error? That was him. Brandon didn't laugh, didn't smile. Just stared at me like I'd insulted his mother's slow cooker. Let me be clear, that wasn't even my sharpest joke this month. Hell, last week I called our vendor onboarding process the corporate version of speed dating with tax fraud. Nobody cared. Because for the last 14 years, I've been the director of vendor risk and contract compliance. Yes, the full title, and my job has been to sniff out the rot before it eats the company alive. I've read more NDAs than most people read shampoo labels. I don't waste words, I say what matters. And up until that moment, my sarcasm was treated like what it was: a coping mechanism in a world of corporate hallucination, where people get promoted for using phrases like synergistic budget fluidity. So I figured I was fine. Brandon would roll his eyes. He'd move on, and by 3 o'clock I'd be back at my desk reworking the third-party vendor access matrix that nobody else understands, but everyone's too scared to admit is broken. Spoiler, I was wrong. Before I go further, real quick, if you've been listening for a bit and haven't subscribed yet, now's a good time. 90% of people forget to, and it really helps the team keep bringing you these stories. And hey, toss a like if this feels a little too close to your last team building offsite. You know the one, with the box lunches and the vague threat of yoga. Anyway, after the meeting, Brandon didn't say a word, just scooped up his notepad and strutted out like he'd just solved climate change with a pie chart. But by 5 o'clock, I had an Outlook invite from HR for brief sync the next morning. No agenda, no explanation, just please join. The kind of meeting that smells like burnt toast and career regret. Still, I wasn't sweating it. I'd seen people come and go over the years, VPs with big talk and zero depth. They usually left once they realized vendor compliance isn't just about signing forms and playing nice. It's about liability exposure, risk transfer clauses, indemnity loopholes, stuff that bites hard when it's ignored. I had survived 7 CFOs, 4 reorgs, and 1 CEO who thought a service-level agreement was something you bought at Best Buy. But something in Brandon's eyes that day, it stuck with me. Not just anger, not offense. It was personal, like I'd done more than make a joke. Like I'd exposed something fragile behind that pressed shirt and recycled leadership quotes. Still, I spent the evening doing what I always did, reviewing vendor audit reports with a glass of boxed red and reruns of Columbo humming in the background. I even laughed about it with my sister on the phone. "They're not going to fire you over a joke," she said. "You'd think," I replied, "but we're now living in the age where sarcasm is considered a hostile act." Next morning, I wore my second-best blazer and packed a yogurt in my bag, fully expecting to be back at my desk by 9:30. Instead, I walked into HR at 8 o'clock sharp and found Brandon already sitting there. He didn't look at me, just kept scrolling his phone like this was beneath him. HR rep smiled like a hostage blinking for help. That was when the ground shifted. They didn't even offer coffee. Brandon finally looked up from his phone, crossed one leg over the other like he'd seen it in a seminar, and said, "Your tone yesterday was unacceptable. No greeting, no pleasantries, not even a fake HR smile." "Excuse me," I said, sitting across from him. "You undermined leadership in front of cross-functional stakeholders. That creates a hostile environment." He said it like he was reading cue cards. I half expected him to hold up a laminated list: Karen bad, team feelings hurt, action required. The HR rep, Melissa, I think she's new, nodded solemnly like we were discussing a mass casualty event, and not a single sarcastic joke in a 2-hour snooze-fest of a budget call. She kept glancing at Brandon like he was the one who'd be writing her next performance review. "Okay," I said, voice neutral. "So a sarcastic comment qualifies as hostility now?" "It's not the first time," Brandon continued, ignoring the question. "You've made multiple remarks during meetings that reflect poorly on the leadership team." I tilted my head. Is the leadership team allergic to humor or just selective hearing? Melissa shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Brandon's lips pressed into a thin line. "Gotcha." That's when he pulled out the folder, classic HR move, and slid a printed email across the table. "This is just one example," he said. I looked down. It was a forwarded complaint. Anonymous, of course. The kind of thing typed in Arial 11 by someone with the spine of a boiled shrimp. Something about me being dismissive of initiatives and curt in tone. No specifics. No context. Just vague enough to weaponize. I nodded, slid it back, and said, "So this is a personality conflict." Brandon leaned forward. This is a culture issue. There it was. The new corporate buzzword holy grail, culture, the all-purpose guillotine. Doesn't matter how long you've been somewhere, how clean your record is, how essential your work once they decide you don't fit. Exit script writes itself. Melissa chimed in then like she'd been practicing this line all week. We'd like to schedule a quick conversation tomorrow morning to wrap this up. Not follow up. Not continue the discussion. Wrap this up. I glanced at my watch. Should I bring a box? She blinked. Brandon didn't laugh. Figures. I stood up. Cool, I'll be here at 8, before the rest of the culture rolls in, and I walked out. That night, I didn't rage, didn't cry, didn't even rant into a glass of wine like I usually do when budget season turns into a dumpster fire. I just sat at my kitchen counter, pulled up our internal server on my personal laptop, because yes, Brandon, I still had access, and opened the MSA, Master Services Agreement, 228 pages, signed 6 months ago by both us and the buyer's legal team. The acquisition wasn't public yet, but anyone on the risk team knew it was coming. The groundwork had been years in the making, and thanks to a dozen high-risk vendors with sloppy cyber hygiene and a tendency to mislabel invoices, I had fought tooth and nail to insert a clause during the final revision sprint. 6.2. Final Vendor Risk Review Signatory Required. Karen M. Benton, Director of VRCC, by name, irrevocable. No substitutions without express written release from me. Why? Because buyers don't want surprises, especially not the kind that turn into fines. They didn't know about that clause. Brandon certainly didn't. HR, not a clue. Legal probably forgot or assumed I'd be there to sign off like always, so I printed the page, scanned it with my phone, forwarded it to my private inbox with the subject line, insurance policy. Then I deleted every trace from the company laptop, shut it down, placed it neatly into my bag for the morning. I didn't know exactly how this would play out, but I knew one thing: they were about to cut the wrong line from the budget, and I wasn't going to stop them. I walked in at 7:59, wearing the same navy blazer I wore the day I was promoted to director. That morning, I didn't bring breakfast. I brought my badge, my charger, and the company laptop wrapped like a gift in a padded sleeve. No illusions, no bargaining, just closure. Melissa was already in the room, typing something in her little HR portal with the kind of brittle energy you only get from someone who knows they're facilitating something deeply wrong but needs to keep the mortgage paid. Brandon showed up 2 minutes late, holding a protein smoothie and chewing like a cow in a storm. Karen, he nodded like this was a coffee catch-up. Thanks for coming in early. I sat. Let's do it. No one asked if I wanted water. No one even asked if I had questions. It was all printed, already stapled, with the kind of robotic efficiency that screams, "We made this decision days ago and hoped you wouldn't make it weird." Melissa began reading from the script, her voice all soft HR concern with none of the soul behind it. This meeting is to formally document the termination of your employment due to ongoing issues with professional conduct and communication that have impacted team morale and created discomfort among leadership. I stared at her. You mean the joke? Brandon cut in. This isn't about one incident. Of course not, I said. It's about the fact that I don't smile when you bring up agile synergies. He blinked. Melissa moved on. We're offering standard severance, conditional upon non-disparagement and signature of the release form. She slid the papers across the table like it was a diner check. 5 pages. Severance amount, laughable. Release clause, ironclad. Timeline, immediate. No mention of legal. No general counsel present. No acquisition liaison looped in. And absolutely no understanding of what they'd just done. I pushed the papers back without touching them. I won't be signing. Brandon tilted his head. That's your choice. We can't release the severance without it. Oh no, I said, folding my hands. I think you've released quite enough already. Melissa glanced at him, clearly unsure whether to proceed. He gave the tiniest nod. She reached into her file, pulled out a standard termination confirmation, and slid it over. Then we'll finalize this now. Please return all company property. I pulled the laptop from my bag, set it on the table with the badge and the charger. I stood, smoothed my jacket. And then I said, you're absolutely certain this is final? Brandon didn't look up from his smoothie. We've made our decision. Good, I said, then so have I. I picked up my phone and before they could say a word, opened the scanner app and pulled the single sheet I'd tucked into my notebook. Clause 6.2, MSA, my name, my title, final risk approval. No substitutions, required signatory. I tapped send to myself and watched the progress bar tick over. Brandon finally looked up. What was that? I smiled, just deleting my calendar. Can't miss my next yoga retreat. Melissa exhaled like she'd been holding it in since Tuesday. I turned, heels clicking, and walked out the door without looking back. Down the hall, past the break room where someone was burning toast, past the intern who always said hi too loud, past the framed poster about excellence through innovation that hung crooked for 6 months before I fixed it myself. Out the front door, into the morning air that smelled like concrete and fresh paper. I should have felt something, anger, sadness, betrayal, but all I felt was sharp, like the edge of something waiting to drop, and they just handed me the rope. I spent the next 3 days in a kind of suspended calm, like watching a car hydroplane in slow motion. Except the car was the company I'd given 14 years to, and the black ice was named Brandon. Day 1, I got up at 6:30 like usual. Muscle memory, made coffee, opened my laptop, and stared at an empty inbox. No work calendar alerts, no compliance flags blinking red, just silence, cold and stupid. Then came the pings, Slack leaks, LinkedIn updates. The company's transformation team had wasted no time polishing the turd. Brandon posted a selfie with 2 other execs in front of a whiteboard that still had my handwriting on it, my notes, my schema. The caption, excited to lead the next evolution of our vendor risk framework. Real change takes courage. #leadership #transformation. I actually laughed. Day 2, the rumors started hitting the private LinkedIn groups. The acquisition was moving fast. Confidential sources. Big buyer. Accelerated timeline. High compliance expectations. That part made me pause. High compliance expectations. They were building a rocket with duct tape and calling it innovation. By day 3, the leaks turned from gossip to praise. Some mid-level marketing clown posted a long, cringy gratitude message about Brandon's bold leadership during this exciting chapter, thanking him for making the hard calls. A few brave souls liked it, most didn't. But what really got me was the email I didn't expect. A message from Jenna, one of the junior analysts I'd mentored since her internship days. She'd once asked me to explain risk tiers in plain English, and I drew a cartoon duck with a machete and said, if the duck can bankrupt us, that's tier 1. Her message was short. Subject, miss you body, it's weird here without you. No one knows what's going on. You moved your old desk into the hallway and gave your team to some guy from procurement. Also, there's a Slack channel called Project Velocity and it's all Brandon bragging. We miss you, it's a mess here. I read it twice, then I archived it. I didn't reply, not because I didn't care, but because the wheels were already in motion and the worst thing I could do now was touch them. They needed to walk straight into it. By that night, I had every tab open. My personal copy of the MSA, the version from DocuSign, fully executed and timestamped. The internal policy memo that confirmed my title was still active as director of VRCC through the end of Q4. Brandon hadn't rescinded it. He didn't know to. His HR flunkies never coordinated with legal. They skipped the kill switch. And the kicker? The buyer's own legal counsel had named me in their sign-off documents by request. Apparently, their team had done some actual due diligence and flagged my compliance record as one of the only reasons they trusted the transition. Clause 6.2 was their idea. I just fought to keep it binding. I knew the clock was ticking. The acquisition wasn't just a merger, it was a cleanup job. Big buyer, bigger problems. They needed it to look seamless, risk-free, buttoned up, and I was the button, not figuratively. Literally, my signature was the last box, a keystone in a compliance arch built over 18 months. So I made a list, everything they'd need, everything I could prove I'd handled, everything they'd fail to replicate without me. Vendor logs, subcontractor indemnity reviews, the flagged reports from Q2 with the third-party billing anomalies, all buried in my digital footprint. I backed it up to a thumb drive and labeled it confetti, just in case. Then I poured a glass of wine and sat by the window, watching the city blink in that soft, post-rain glow. I wasn't going to reach out. I wasn't going to warn them, because I'd spent 14 years protecting people who didn't even know they needed protecting. And this time, they could find out the hard way. We met at a coffee shop that still used real mugs. No QR codes, no piped-in acoustic pop, just chipped ceramic and the scent of dark roast that had been burning since the Clinton administration. It was halfway between her new firm and my apartment, neutral ground for what was, essentially, a legal postmortem with espresso foam. Her name's Adrienne. We shared an office wall for 6 years. Back then, she used to yell through the drywall every time someone in contracts tried to greenlight a vendor without a compliance rider. She once stapled an indemnity clause to a VP's tie. My kind of person. She was already there when I walked in, flipping through a thick binder of red lines and notes like she hadn't left corporate war rooms behind. She saw me stood and said, "You look surprisingly calm. Turns out severance packages make great coasters," I said, sliding into the booth. We hugged like people who have read each other's darkest email drafts. Then I ordered a black coffee and pulled out my phone. Clause 6.2, I said, opening the PDF. Final vendor risk approval. My name. No substitutes, no caveats, buyer requested, fully executed. Adrienne didn't touch the phone, she didn't need to. I remember the fight over that clause, she said. You made a VP cry. He kept asking if we could just assume good faith on third-party vendors who store our client data on flash drives. She snorted. God, that guy. Silence settled for a second, then she leaned in. So, they fired you? I nodded. For tone. No legal rep in the room. No acquisition counsel looped. Just Brandon and an HR puppet. Her face hardened. You're kidding, I wish I were. They handed me a 5-page severance offer like I was a failed intern and told me to sign and go quietly. Adrienne swore under her breath. Did anyone from legal even call you afterward? Not a soul. I'm radioactive now, apparently. She closed her binder. Karen, they didn't just screw up. They detonated a landmine and kept walking. I raised my eyebrows. That bad? Adrienne pulled out her phone, scrolled for a moment, and then turned the screen toward me. An internal thread from a partner at the buyer's law firm. The subject line, final sign-off delay vendor risk officer no longer employed. The thread was 3 messages long. The last one said, contractual obligation is specific, named individual. No reassignment permitted. Cannot close until resolved. I exhaled. Slow and steady. They're scrambling, aren't they? I asked. Adrienne nodded. They had a prep call yesterday. Your name came up 5 times in the first 10 minutes. Brandon told them you were no longer affiliated with the organization and they nearly flipped. I laughed into my mug. And legal didn't flag it? Oh, legal flagged it. But they didn't know you'd already been terminated. No one told them. Brandon just did it. We sat with that for a while. 2 women in a booth, sipping bitter coffee while a $90 million deal quietly hemorrhaged behind conference room doors. So what happens now? I asked. Adrienne leaned back. Now they stall. They'll try to amend, plead ignorance, beg for flexibility, but that clause is locked. The buyer insisted on it. Their board won't budge. The only way this deal closes is if you sign that final risk report. And if I don't, she smiled, not kindly, not cruelly, just the smile of someone who's read too many breach memos to be surprised by anything. Then they're in breach of representation, which triggers the rollback clause, which means they don't just lose face, they lose the deal. I stared down into my cup, the swirl of coffee cooling now, the faint ripple of something inevitable. Adrienne spoke again, quiet this time. You gonna help them? I looked up at her, held her gaze, then said, they didn't ask. She clinked her mug against mine. To bridges not burned, but rigged with motion sensors. And we drank. By Monday morning, the office was dressed for war. The Slack channel banners changed from FYI to mission critical. Conference rooms were booked out like hotel suites during a hurricane, and every LinkedIn profile within 50 yards of the company's headquarters updated with strategic operations or acquisition liaison like that meant something. And me? I was in sweatpants, sitting on my balcony with a bagel and a front row seat to the implosion. The acquisition was supposed to be clean, quiet, whispered to shareholders under NDAs and champagne breath. But instead, it had turned into a frantic performance of pretend everything is fine with Brandon playing lead clown, flanked by 3 junior VPs and a compliance team so understaffed, it looked like an understudy cast for Succession, Community College edition. My name came up in a half-dozen group chats and internal threads that leaked faster than a dollar store raincoat. First, it was just old files they couldn't open, because I'd been the admin of the encrypted vendor risk archive. Then it was flagged contracts missing backup documentation, files only stored under my personal access credentials, which were now revoked. Then came the emails. A friend in IT forwarded me one, bless his gossipy soul. Timestamp 6:12 a.m. 2. Legal OPSOL subject. Urgent vendor sign-off protocol. Can anyone confirm who is executing the final vendor risk review in Karen Benton's absence? Buyer has flagged clause 6.2 again. We need confirmation today. The first reply came from someone in procurement. Wasn't that reassigned to Tyler? The next reply, from a compliance analyst I used to mentor. Clause 6.2 is non-transferable. It specifically names Karen by title and full name. I don't think it can be reassigned without her release. And then silence. 20 minutes later, someone from legal replied with a red exclamation point, escalating to Brandon and legal counsel. Need to review immediately. Do not proceed until clarified. You'd think that would have set off alarms. Instead, they buried it. Tyler, God bless his man-child haircut and startup hoodie, was pushed into the role of interim vendor risk lead 3 days earlier. He was given my old folder system, now missing 2 critical subdirectories, and told to fill in the gaps. Gaps which, by the way, were audit flags tied to 7 different vendor contracts, one of which had a known data leak in 2021 and had been held together with legal tape I personally drafted. But Tyler wasn't reading the files. He was optimizing workflows, which, near as I could tell from his posts, meant color-coding Excel cells and calling it innovation. A source inside legal sent me a screen capture that afternoon, Brandon holding court in the executive meeting, declaring that all final signatures were on track and that minor personnel transitions had been resolved. They were lying, or worse, believing their own nonsense. And that's the most dangerous kind of leadership, the kind that thinks confidence is a substitute for compliance, that if you smile hard enough and schedule enough meetings, the documents will magically sign themselves. Meanwhile, the buyer's team? Oh, they were watching. I'd heard from Adrienne again that morning. 1-sentence text, they think you'll cave, that was the strategy, wait me out. Assume I'd miss the paycheck, miss the prestige, miss the need to matter. That I'd show up, badge in hand, and say, let's be adults. But I didn't miss any of it. I watched the panic swirl beneath the surface. Last-minute legal huddles, frenzied Slack threads, whispers in the hallways. But no public acknowledgement, not yet. They were still in denial, hoping to duct tape the breach and smile through the investor call. Let them. I wasn't angry anymore, that ship sailed. I wasn't even smug. I was just still and sharp and ready. Because I knew exactly when the bottom would fall out. And I knew the moment it did, they'd all be looking for someone to blame. But by then, be unreachable, because the axe wasn't in my hand. It was already falling. 9 o'clock a.m., Zoom room opens. The waiting room's got all the usual suspects. The buyer's legal team looking like they just stepped off a yacht, our executive team pretending not to sweat through their collars, and Brandon grinning like the prom king of bad decisions. Morning all, he says, like this is just another quarterly update. Excited to get this closed. The buyer's team is polite. Posed? No one's drinking coffee. That's how you know it's serious. They're past caffeine. They're in shark smile mode now, and they've got the leverage. Brandon makes a joke about finally getting this across the finish line. Someone laughs. One of our internal VPs cracks open a la croix like it's champagne. I'm not on the call, of course, but I might as well be, because I know exactly how this script goes. I wrote half the damn playbook they're trying to improvise their way through. Adrian had sent me a quick update that morning. Buyer team is holding firm. They're going to ask explicitly. So I just sat back on my couch, wrapped in a cardigan older than most of the interns Brandon fired, and waited. One eye on my inbox. One on the sky outside, pale and cold. Back in the Zoom room, the buyer's lead counsel clears his throat. Name's Thomas Lind, man who once rewrote a 300-page contract over a weekend because someone used the word material instead of substantial. You don't bluff a man like Thomas. Before we proceed, he says, voice crisp, not rushed, we'll need final vendor risk sign-off in accordance with Master Services Agreement, Section 6.2. Silence, a beat too long. Brandon chuckles, smooth as cheap bourbon. Oh, you mean Karen? He glances at someone off camera. Yeah, she's no longer with the company, still smiling. Still cocky, he doesn't even flinch. He thinks this is a footnote, a clerical hiccup. Thomas doesn't laugh, he doesn't even blink. I see, he says. So the required signatory listed in 6.2 is unavailable? Brandon waves a hand. We've transitioned those responsibilities to another director. It's all in the internal chain now. One of our younger legal associates, God bless his naive little heart, nods eagerly and adds, yes, our procurement lead has reviewed and confirmed all vendor documentation. Shouldn't be an issue. Thomas just sits there. For a long time. Then he leans forward. The language in 6.2 specifies that final vendor risk sign-off must be executed by Karen M. Benton, Director of VRCC, as per the executed copy dated April 14. The clause does not allow reassignment or substitution without written release from the named party. Silence. You can hear the HVAC system through someone's mic. Brandon's smile twitches. Well, I mean, surely there's room for some flexibility here. Thomas raises an eyebrow. Is there a release document signed by Miss Benton? Nobody speaks. Brandon shifts in his seat. Look, this is a small procedural gap. We can resolve this offline. Thomas's tone never changes. Don't proceed without that sign-off. It's a condition of closing. And we are, at this moment, non-compliant. You can feel the room shift. Virtually or not, everyone knows it. The CFO starts to open his mouth, then shuts it. Someone from the buyer's finance team starts typing. Probably an internal message, do not authorize fund release. The VP of Legal, who should have flagged this weeks ago, just mutters something inaudible. No one backs Brandon. Not one person. Brandon swallows, you can hear it. I'll follow up, he says finally, we'll sort this today. Thomas nods once like a surgeon before a cut. We'll reconvene when compliance is confirmed. Until then, the transaction is on hold. Click, click, click. One by one, the buyer's team exits the call. Nobody says a word on our side. Not Brandon, not legal, not the CFO. Just the humming sound of panic trying to find a place to land. And me. I was still sitting on the couch. The breeze shifted outside, and my inbox pinged. Subject, urgent sign-off request from outside counsel body. Karen, as per MSA 6.2, you remain the required final signatory. Please advise availability to execute immediately. I didn't respond, not yet. Back inside the executive war room, no one was breathing right. They'd reassembled 20 minutes after the call cratered. Same room, same players. But the energy had shifted from smug anticipation to something brittle and sweating under its collar. No one touched their coffee. The VP who opened his La Croix earlier hadn't even sipped it. It just sat there, bubbling like it knew something they didn't. Brandon was pacing. That was his thing when he didn't have answers, movement masquerading as strategy. His phone was buzzing nonstop. Legal, PR, board. Probably HR asking if they should start drafting another passive-aggressive LinkedIn post about leadership transitions. The general counsel, Mark, a guy who usually walked around like he invented due diligence, was flipping through the bound copy of the MSA with the kind of manic energy reserved for people realizing they'd just missed a comma that could cost them millions. Flip, flip, stop. His face went pale. Brandon stopped pacing. Well, Mark didn't look up. This clause, he said, voice thin, almost flat. It specifies Karen M. Benton by name. A few heads turned. Brandon frowned. Yeah, and Mark slowly raised his eyes. Signatory cannot be reassigned without her written release. Silence. Not the kind of silence that feels temporary. The kind that enters a room and locks the door behind it. The junior associate in legal, maybe 25, fresh from Georgetown, still using color-coded tabs, broke it with the most damning phrase in corporate history. We never got that. You could almost hear the pressure drop in the room. Brandon's jaw twitched. No, that can't be right. There has to be some kind of clause for reallocation, delegated authority, or something. Mark shook his head. Not in this section. This was carved out explicitly, buyer's requirement. Then we'll fix it, Brandon snapped. We'll get her to sign. He didn't finish. Because at that moment, Thomas Lind, the buyer's lawyer, reappeared in the Zoom call. Someone had left the link active and he dropped back in like a ghost at a funeral. Still here, he said calmly. Just wanted to confirm something. Brandon straightened. We're resolving the issue. Thomas didn't flinch. Did your team obtain a formal release from Miss Benton prior to her departure? Brandon looked at Mark. Mark looked at the table. Thomas nodded. Then you're out of compliance. Brandon took a breath. I'll fix this. Thomas smiled. Not kindly, not cruelly, just knowingly you won't. The screen went black again. Mark didn't speak. He didn't move. He just closed the MSA slowly like it might bite. Someone near the back of the room, an operations lead who hadn't said a word all morning, murmured, "We really never got that release?" No one answered him. Because they were all thinking the same thing, they hadn't just made a mistake. They'd triggered a clause. One that couldn't be undone with an apology, a LinkedIn post, or a hastily scheduled board update. This wasn't a hiccup. This was a breach. A public, irreversible breach. And it was now sitting in the inboxes of every senior executive, every compliance officer, and most importantly, the buyer's board. Back at my place, I was microwaving leftovers and reading through my own inbox, which now held 3 increasingly frantic emails from outside counsel, 2 from Mark and 1 from Brandon himself with the subject line, "Can we talk?" The universe must have a sense of humor, because just as I sat down with my bowl of sad lasagna, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find a courier holding a manila envelope with a return address from HQ. Inside, a printed request for release of signatory rights under MSA 6.2. No note, no explanation, just the form, unsigned. I folded it in half, placed it under my lasagna container like a placemat, and took a bite. Salty, burnt, perfect. It came in at 4:47 a.m., not from Brandon, not from Mark, not from HR, who last I heard had collectively taken PTO to process transition fatigue. No, this one was from outside counsel. One line, no greeting, no pleasantries. You are still listed as active. Please advise. No subject line, no signature. Just panic. Dressed in lawyer fonts. I sat at my kitchen table, bathed in the kind of golden October sunlight that makes even unpaid utility bills look romantic. My hands were wrapped around a chipped ceramic mug I'd bought at a roadside antique mall years ago, back when I thought promotions came with loyalty, and not just bigger targets on your back. Outside, the neighborhood kids were dragging backpacks across the pavement, kicking leaves, yelling about waffles. Life was happening. Unbothered. Inside, they were unraveling. By the time I poured my second cup, the internal emails had leaked. My phone lit up with screenshots from 2 friends still inside. One from the board thread read, "Who authorized this termination? Was legal consulted? Where is the signed release? Get Brandon in here now." Capital letters, time-stamped rage, the digital equivalent of a boardroom brawl in press suits. Brandon, of course, wasn't answering. Word was he'd left early the night, muttering about escalations and Karen's paperwork to an empty parking lot. Mark had tried to spin it, said it was an HR oversight and that remedial steps were being taken, but no one was buying it, because they knew you don't lose a $90 million acquisition over an oversight. You lose it over ego. The clause stood, carved in stone, notarized in digital ink, embedded in a deal too large to fudge. There was no backdoor, no workaround, no PR band-aid to slap on it. And me? I didn't have to move a finger. I didn't call anyone, didn't storm into any offices, didn't write a strongly worded LinkedIn post about respecting the voices of seasoned women in compliance. I just existed, and that was the win. Because sometimes revenge isn't a fireball. It's a quiet seat at the table no one thought you'd still have. Around 8:12 a.m., my inbox pinged again. This one with a little more polish. Subject, consulting engagement proposal from Strategic Acquisitions Buyer Group Body. Karen, we've been following the developments regarding the MSA. Given your history with the vendor risk portfolio and our ongoing interest in completing the transition, we'd like to retain you for a short-term consulting engagement. Scope and compensation attached. Please let us know if you're available. Best regards, Thomas Lind, PDF attached. Retainer amount. More than my last quarterly salary and no mention of Brandon. I stirred my coffee, took a slow sip, watched the steam curl into the light. Then I clicked the document, scanned the scope, and hit accept. Murmured under my breath, just loud enough for the walls to remember, unprofessional conduct. Then smiled. Appreciate you sticking around, you legends of the break room. Subscribe for more chaos. Let's make your old managers spill their coffee in fear.